Hey everyone, and welcome back to Joey's Retro Handhelds. I'm Joey, and today we're going to be doing a deep dive comparison between the Anbernic RG353V and the Anbernic RG35XX. We'll see which one's better. Despite their appearances, there's some pretty significant differences between the two models that we'll get into and might give you an idea of where they differ, especially when it comes to price, but specs and power as well. Right now, there's only 4 good vertical models available to you. The 2 models I just showed you, the VS model, which is kind of a light version of the V model, and then the Miu Mini Plus, which I'm sure you've seen everywhere. I did a video on the Miu Mini Plus versus the Anbernic RG35XX, which you should check out. Might give you some context into this video. And now I figured it's a good time to do a comparison between the 35XX and the 353V, which is a lot more of a significant difference. The 353V has a few different color options. There's black, gray, white, and purple. And you can see here that I grabbed the white. They all look pretty good in my opinion, but I went with the white because it had the skittle cutlered buttons, and that's something that I prefer. The 35XX also has a few different color options in white, gray, and purple. Purple ended up being my favorite among the 3. It's a little bit more muted in color than you can tell online, so just keep that in mind. But either way, on both ends for both the 35XX as well as the 353V, Anbernic has a few different good color options available to them that should cover any of your needs. One of the benefits of Anbernic is that they do a lot of different colors and things of that nature, and it makes things a lot better for when you're shopping for devices. Let's talk about specs, and the RG353V is the more powerful of the two, and it's by a large margin. The 353V can do Nintendo 64, Dreamcast, PSP, as well as everything else that the 35XX can do, which is up to PlayStation 1. That's sort of where the 35XX just stops. Now, the 35XX does have custom firmware that actually can do more than PS1, so they've seen some N64 and Dreamcast and all of that, but I don't think it's really ready for prime time yet, and so I don't want to kind of talk about it that much. For a regular person that's just going to be shopping for these devices, you can kind of get away with the fact that the 35XX can do up to PlayStation 1 and pretty much the entire PlayStation 1 library, and then the 353V can go a little bit further than that. We'll talk about performance a little bit later on. Besides that, they both have the same screen, which is a 640 by 480 4:3 aspect ratio screen, which is pretty good for retro games. That's kind of what you're looking for in a 4:3 aspect ratio. And then on top of that, the 353V can do Linux as well as Android, so it dual boots both, where the 35XX can only do Linux at the moment. I don't think that's going to change. I don't see an Android build being available for it in the future. And then continuing on with the differences, like I mentioned before, the 353V is a bigger brother to this, so it's got a lot more power and specs. This has touchscreen, it has Wi-Fi, it has the dual boot for Android, it has more RAM. So you can sort of see it just piles up that it's a lot more powerful device compared to the 35XX. Also, you probably noticed it, but it has 2 analog sticks as well, which we'll talk about a little bit later, as I'm not really a huge fan of them. The 353V is a bit taller as well, and it has a larger battery, which really translates to about an hour or so more than the 35XX. You're going to get about 4 to 6 hours on both, a little bit more because of the 353V's bigger battery, but it also has Wi-Fi, so that brings it back a little bit as well. And then lastly, as far as things that most people care about, both of them do have HDMI out through a mini HDMI port, so you don't have to worry about that. You can connect them to the TV and play through there. Rounding out the specs, and I'm sure it was pretty obvious, but the 353V basically beats out the 35XX in every single way except for size. For pricing, this is where things change quite drastically. The 353V is regularly on sale for $108 US or $121 US MSRP. The 35XX is $56 US MSRP or on sale for a bit lower. I think the last sale was about $48. And these are all coming direct from Anbernic's website. So now when you look at the things that the RG353V does better in the specs that we talked about, you start to wonder if it's worth double the price of the 35XX. My personal answer is no, and you can come to your own conclusions by the end of this video. But either way, I'll have links to both models in my description, depending on which way you want to go. I also mentioned it briefly earlier, but there's an RG353VS model, which is right smack in the middle of both of these devices, and it's the exact same as the 353V, except it's $88 on sale or $98 MSRP, and in comparison to the V, it's about $20 less, but it only has Linux, no Android, less RAM, and no touchscreen. So for this model, you'd be looking at a $32-ish premium on top of the 35XX, and game-wise, it's going to be similar to what I show today, so you can decide if that's worth it to you. My personal answer is still no, even for this model, but if you're gonna go for something better than the 35XX for a vertical form factor, I would highly recommend the VS over the V. Both of these devices are really well made, and they feel pretty similar for the most part. Starting from the top, and the RG353V has an OTG port, which no one really uses at the moment, mini HDMI port, 3.5mm headphone jack, and the 35XX only has the mini HDMI port at the top. The right side of both devices is the same with the power button, reset button, and then the operating system SD card slot and ROM SD card slot. The bottom is where the actual USB-C charging port is, and the 35XX has the headphone jack as well. Then on the left side, the volume rockers. Looking at the front, and both basically have the same layout, except the RG353V has the analog sticks, of course, which we'll talk about in a second. D-pad on both is just fine. It's the normal Anbernic D-pad. It's a bit stiff and prone to false diagonals, but otherwise it's completely usable. Button-wise, the 353V has better grips thanks to the textures on the letters of each button. It's more of a rough feeling than the slippery ones on the 35XX. In actual usage, I like both of them just fine. There's no clear winner here for me. And then we have the front-firing speakers, which is great, and we'll talk about sound a little bit later. Okay, let's talk about the actual sticks on the RG353V, and I personally think they're just useless. They aren't very comfortable to use, being so close to each other and at the bottom in this form factor. This is likely one of those weird Joey things, but it just isn't a great way to play or use, and I can't say that I've been using them at all, which sort of goes into my whole issue with this device. If these sticks are unusable to me, then the platforms that use them become unfun to play or not comfortable, even if they actually ran well, which we'll talk about later. So it defeats the whole purpose of this device existing, as it's one of the main reasons that you would get it, is for those actual analog sticks. Now, it's one of the main reasons that I went for the horizontal version of this device, which I reviewed before, and that's the RG353PS. That actually has usable sticks, and it's really comfortable, where this isn't. So if one of your concerns looking at this device is the comfort of the sticks, then yeah, for me, they aren't. But you'd have to be looking at a horizontal device for that, and then there's a lot of options. But for vertical, this is as good as you're gonna get. As far as screens go, the 353V has a better colored screen in my opinion, and it's a very tiny amount. Both are at max brightness here, and I'm hoping it comes through, but the colors pop just a bit more on the 353V, and it makes it more of an enjoyable experience. I've mentioned it a few times on a few different videos, but I find the 35XX's screen to just be slightly washed out in comparison to other screens. But honestly, you can't go wrong with either of these, it's just a nitpick since I'm comparing them. Audio-wise, the 353V sounds better. The 35XX gets really distorted and quickly, and not even at full volume, where the 353V sounds nicely throughout. Let's have a listen to the 353V first. And now the 35XX. I'm hoping some of it comes through, as sometimes it doesn't, but yeah, the 353V overall just has better sound. Software between both devices is wildly different. On the 353V, we have a stock Anbernic Android as well as the custom firmware, like ArcOS. ArcOS is currently, in my mind, the best custom firmware for the Linux side of this device, and what I'm personally using. Just a note on this. There is a Black Serif custom Android build available if you have the version 2 screen of this device. However, it will soft brick your device if you have the version 1 screen. In either event, I don't recommend the build, and I highly suggest you stick with the stock Android, and if you want the Google Play Store, follow my video guide to sideload it. On the RG35XX, we have a few different available custom firmwares like I mentioned before, but the most popular one by far is Garlic OS, by the same Black Serif. From an install perspective, ArcOS is a lot easier to use, as it's simple as flashing an image to the SD card and popping it in. Whereas Garlic OS does require a bit more with expanding partitions. Now, feature-wise, ArcOS is also wildly superior. There's just a lot more you can do. There's more features, more options, and then obviously because we have Wi-Fi on the 353V, we have a whole lot of other options available like wireless file transfers, retro achievements, and more. Garlic OS is more of a basic idea in scope and minimalistic, with the core function just being games. And that continues with how it operates, as Garlic OS only needs a single button press to save state and shut down. Where ArcOS doesn't really have a sleep function in that way or a shutdown function in that way, and so it operates as normal with having to shut down with a hold of the button. So overall, there's pros and cons to both. It really depends on what you want. If you want an easy pick up and go device and the software reflects that, then the 35XX is perfect. If you want a more feature-rich environment with Wi-Fi support, the 353V would be a better option there. Now, I mentioned it before, but games is where the devices really differ. The 35XX can do up to and including PlayStation 1 and over 90% of the platform, perfectly. So talking about arcade, Game Boys, NES, SNES, Genesis, and all of those are going to play just fine. So I'm not going to be doing an overly long showcase here, as I have videos on both devices and you can check those out to see more. So let's just talk about the differences. Before we even move to the Android side, the Linux side of the 353V can do a lot more than the 35XX. The first difference actually has to do with the PlayStation 1 and under consoles. As with the extra power in the 353V, fast forward is a lot faster, which matters for Pokemon games and other JRPG battles that you just don't want to deal with and want to speed up to get over with. You can see on screen the major difference between the two. Beyond that, the 353V can also do some Nintendo 64, Dreamcast, and PSP. Now this is where things get murky for me personally, and this will be one of the main reasons I recommend the 35XX over the 353V, besides the analog sticks. The 353V doesn't have perfect Nintendo 64, Dreamcast, or PSP. This is very similar to how the RG405M or Retroid Pocket 3 Plus can't do perfect GameCube, Wii, or PS2. You're going to be making a lot of concessions here. You're going to have games that just don't run well, you're going to have games that need a lot of tweaks, and you're going to have to play around with different cores and emulators to get things to run. So while you can get Super Mario 64 running perfectly and easily, not every game is going to have that. And so, on top of that, it's just going to take a lot of patience on your end, and it depends on the type of person you are. But one other benefit to RG353V is the existence of Portmaster, which allows you to get other games like PC games to work on this device. So you can see here with Stardew Valley, but there's also Undertale and Shovel Knight and a whole other list of games that'll work. Now with the RG353V, you can also jump into the Android side. And that side does Nintendo 64 a bit better, but we're still not completely perfect. Dreamcast I found to work better on the Linux side, and PSP is just something I'm going to skip over, as I don't think this is a good PSP device at all. However, you do get the added bonus of native Android games and cloud streaming with Moonlight, XP Play, PS Play. The trigger buttons don't work with native Android games, and cloud streaming to a low resolution 4x3 device isn't especially great either, so I'm not sure if these would be considered positives. To sort of sum up everything, it really depends on the type of person you are. If you're like me, I want to just load up a game and have it run, because if it doesn't, I can just play that game elsewhere. It's 2023 and I really don't want to have to mess around with having to get something like Nintendo 64 working. But if you're the type that wants to stretch everything they can out of a device, then yeah, you might get a decent enough time with these consoles. And so that's where my dilemma is. In my mind, both of these handhelds stop at PlayStation 1 for perfect compatibility, and then you have the slight edge to the RG353V for having better processing power for fast forward and things like that. Let's do some final thoughts here and then we'll just end the video. I think it was pretty obvious from the start, but the 35XX is just a better buy in my opinion. The 353V just doesn't deliver double the price and value in the extras that it has. The only way I would look at it as being a better purchase is if it did that perfect Nintendo 64 and Dreamcast, which you would only see in a T618 chip device like the 405M or the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus. Now, I don't think they're actually going to make one with the T618 right now, maybe in the future, and at that point we can revisit it and see if it's worth it. But that doesn't solve my problem with the analog sticks just not feeling comfortable, and so I think I just prefer an horizontal device, unless it's the 35XX, which I really like as a vertical form factor. However, on top of all of that, we have the Retroid Pocket 2S, which was just announced and is coming out in a few weeks. Now the thing with that one is that it has wildly better specs than the 353V, and it's cheaper. So unless you really do want a vertical form factor and the most powerful vertical form factor, I would highly suggest looking at something like that Retroid Pocket 2S, which at $99 is going to blow all of these devices away anyways, minus the 35XX, which I still think is a really good buy at that price point to have a good vertical form factor device in your hands. But even still, if you want to go one step above the 35XX, I would say look at the 353VS, which is similar to what we talked about today without the Android side and a little bit less RAM. I think that's a little bit better of a purchase if you had to go one step up from the 35XX. Either way, save your money, stick with the 35XX, it's just a better buy. I'm going to end it here. I hope this comparison video was useful to you, and if you want to continue down this rabbit hole, I have a video on the 35XX compared to the Miu Mini Plus, and that might help you make a decision if you're going to look at those budget vertical handhelds. Share in the comments below which vertical handheld you are purchasing, or if you're not going that route, what horizontal one are you purchasing? Is it going to be the Retroid Pocket 2S like everybody else? Please don't forget to like and sub to help the channel grow, and hope you all have a good one.